it is to experiment, to have an experimental approach. So basically, when we're in uncertainty, there are a lot of unknowns. And when we're making decisions, we may think that we know a lot of answers, but really those decisions are based on assumptions. And what we think is our knowledge may not be true. There are so many factors involved, things are moving around. So a lot of those assumptions, a lot of those things that we think is our knowledge are actually hypotheses and need to be validated. So I think the best thing, the number one principle, is first to acknowledge that we may be wrong. Our decisions is based on hypothesis, and whatever that we think is true may not be true. Then it is to experiment. And then how do we do that? How do we make sure that we can validate our decisions, our hypothesis, before we're committing to it? Good question. Now, there are various methods that can be used. There are some popular ones like the Agile techniques you might have heard about, or there are the lean startup techniques based on lean thinking that you might have heard about. But basically all of them boil down to the fact that we need to hypothesize and come up with an experiment to validate that hypothesis on a small scale. And only then we can scale it up and get it bigger and bigger and bigger. So you need to ask yourself, what is the smallest experiment that I can do to validate my hypothesis and know if I'm on the right track? What are the various factors that I can look for to get some ideas, some pointers, if my decision is on track or not? If I need to change my decision or tweak my decision, how can I experimentally and empirically verify these things? Now, this is the basis of scientific method, and the entire science that our technology and our life is built on has been built on top of this principle. Scientists, they come up with a hypothesis. That hypothesis makes some predictions, and then they go and check those predictions to make sure that hypothesis is valid or invalid, or if they're on the right track or the wrong track, or get some pointers where they should be really looking for their answers or get more data to make better decisions. Well, systems thinking is just a fancy term for seeing the big picture. The ability of a leader to see the big picture, connect the dots, and find relationships that may be hidden to other people is called systems thinking. Now, why do we call it systems thinking? It's because when we are trying to solve a problem, instead of looking at that problem only, we look at the broader ecosystem that our problem is part of. That's why we call it systems thinking. Now, to illustrate how systems thinking works, I'm going to tell you a story, a kind of a funny story. Back in the colonial time when the British ruled India, there was a problem with cobras in the city of Delhi. It was just simply too many cobras, highly populated area, and people were dying because of cobra bites. So the British wanted to get rid of these cobras, and they said, well, what should we do? Maybe we introduce a bounty. People can kill cobras, bring the dead cobra in, and get a bounty for it. And then for a while, the cobra population started going down. And then after a while, what happened was certain entrepreneurs in Delhi found out, well, they can make money from this. So they started breeding cobras. So now suddenly people are breeding cobras, collecting the money, and cobra population is not going down. Now, British officials, again, made a sensible decision. Let's shut down the program. This is not working. And then what happened? All those cobra breeders, they didn't have any point breeding cobras anymore. So they let loose of their cobras into the wild. And suddenly now we have a spike in the population of cobras. So this is a classic example of not applying systems thinking. It's called the cobra effect, where our solution makes the problem worse. Now, both those decisions to introduce a bounty and shut down the program They sounded like sensible decisions at the time of making. They sounded like the right thing to do. But because those decision makers focused on the problem only and didn't look outside the problem, didn't look at the broader ecosystem, didn't think about what could be the unforeseen consequences of their decisions, it led to make the problem worse. Now there is another metaphor that Ross Ackhoff, one of the greatest systems thinkers in the 20th century, uses. He talks about, well, let's suppose you want to look at the car steering wheel and you want to figure out how it works. Why does the car go to the left when you steer to the left? Why does the car go to the right when you steer to the right? What you do in this case is you analyze it. You break down the problem to sub-problems. You look at the steering wheel, you know, there's a shaft there going down, there are gears, how it works, and you get your answer. But if your question is, why do we drive on the left side of the road in Australia and the right side of the road in the US, it doesn't matter how much you analyze it, how much you break it apart, how much you look at the steering wheel, you're not going to find your answer there. The answer is outside your object of interest. The answer is in the history, the answer is in the ecosystem, broader ecosystem outside the car. That's when you apply systems thinking, or what we technically call synthesis, where we look outside our object of interest, find what are the various things, what are the various components of the system, how they interact to each other. If we got time, we could model that system. You know, we could use causal loop diagrams or various other modeling tools to model the entire system. Then we could poke the system from various different directions with possible solutions and see how the system reacts to those solutions. But you don't always have to model the system and go all the way in. You could just have a systems thinking approach. You could become a systems thinker. How do we do it? So first thing, to become a systems thinker, when we are facing with a problem, challenge yourself. Is this the real problem, or is it just a symptom of a problem? What was the problem that the British officials wanted to solve? Was it to reduce the population of cobras, get rid of cobras? Or was it really to reduce the number of casualties caused by cobra deaths? Right? That's the real problem. Once we know the real problem, once we dig a little bit deeper and find the real problem, then we can start looking outside that problem. So what is causing the casualties? You know? And then we can think about what are some possible solutions that we could implement here. And then we could think about what are the unforeseen consequences of these solutions. And at the end of the day, there's a saying in systems thinkers, in systems thinking community, that the easy way out usually leads back in. So, you know, this is the problem that politicians, managers, leaders always face. The easy way out usually leads back in. So the first solution that comes to mind is probably the wrong solution, and you need to dig a little bit deeper. Uncertainty usually affects our emotions. You know, when we don't know what's going to come up, that fear of unknown could result in anxiety, stress in people. Now, a great leader is a leader that can not only control their own anxiety, but also help other people reduce their anxiety or control it or manage it. Now, emotional intelligence is one's capability to be aware of his or her own emotions and to manage, or in some senses control, their own emotions, as well as recognize and be aware of the emotions of other people and influence the emotions of those other people. So now it's a super powerful tool. You know, you see great leaders do it all the time. But the thing is, it's very different to manipulation, because manipulation is with the goal of personal gain or some objective, versus emotional intelligence is truly wanting the better for other people and everyone. is the ability to influence and make people feel better. Now, how does it work? There's a lot of content available, especially by people like Daniel Goleman, who has done great work on emotional intelligence. He's got a 12 competency model of emotional intelligence, various aspects of emotional intelligence and how you can improve it. I highly recommend checking his work. I've also got a summary of it in my book if you're interested in seeing the shorter version of it. But basically, in a nutshell, if I want to take you through it, there's a lot of mindfulness techniques that we could use to first get awareness of our own emotions, how they affect us physiologically, how can we see the signs of those emotions in our bodies, and how can we really connect and feel what we really feel. And second is, how would we build tolerance and resilience in our emotions. So resilience is basically, for example, if you're feeling an emotion which is not helping you or it's like making your performance worse, how can you switch that emotion to something else that helps you? And tolerance is, how would you channel that emotion to the right outcome? So if you're feeling anxious, how would you still keep on feeling anxious but not reduce your performance? So tolerance is really powerful as well. There are techniques, practices for that. Now, emotional intelligence, the metaphor that I use, learning emotional intelligence is like learning swimming. You don't learn swimming by reading a book on swimming. You learn it by practicing swimming, right? You learn the book, fine. You learn the biomechanics of swimming and things like that. But you won't get a better swimmer until you jump in the water and practice it. Same thing with emotional intelligence. Now, to understand other people's emotions, we apply empathy and organizational awareness. There's a big body of knowledge on that. How can you build empathy as a skill? How can you see the world? How can you experience the world through someone else? Not just put yourself in their shoes. Because you are a different person than me. If I put myself in your shoes, I'm going to bring all my baggage, my childhood, my family, my culture, my objectives, my worldview and everything. You have a different set of objectives, worldviews and culture and everything. So the same event may feel different to you than to me. So to truly empathize, I shouldn't put myself in your shoes. I should experience the world through you and be curious to understand you. That's how we really truly understand the emotions of other people. And it's very powerful, because once you truly understand how someone feels and what's going on in their head, what's going on in their heart, then you can influence those emotions. Then you can talk to them on the same level as they are, meet them where they are. So highly recommend emotional intelligence. It's super powerful. It's a great tool for leaders anytime, but even in times of uncertainty, it becomes more important, because it will help you manage those emotions better and influence them for the better. I'm sure it's every leader's dream to have a team that proactively innovates and are really creative, and they bring creativity in their problem solving. Now, there's lots of literature and ideas out there on how to improve creativity and how to create an environment of innovation. Things such as creating psychological safety and really caring for your people and not putting too much pressure on them and things like that. But I'm sure you're all aware of those stuff. There's a lot of content out there. There's a lot of people doing great work on that. Now, what I want to do here is give you two techniques that you could use to improve innovation or create an environment for innovation and utilize foster creativity when solving specific problems. Now, innovation, it's a very interesting thing. Innovation happens when people are allowed to think creatively and take a step back and think strategically. So I'm going to tell you a story which is going to show how other companies have done it. Back in, I think, 80s or 90s, Hewlett-Packard, HP, did some research, internal research, to identify various networks of people in their organization, not the formal hierarchical reporting lines, but networks of various people from different parts of the organization, and how did these networks contributed to innovation in the company. And surprisingly, they found there is a single network of around 35 women in a specific location, in a specific office, that contributed to something, like they created like something like a third of all their significant product innovation ideas. Just in a company of tens of thousands of people, global company, 35 women specifically in a specific location contributed so many ideas. So they got curious, and this is back in the days, maybe there weren't too many women engineers in the offices, so it was disproportional as well. And they were wondering, like, how come this group? So they brought them in for interviewing, and then someone realized, oh, this is the quilting group. So these are the group of people who get together once a week, lunchtime or something, and they quilt together. And they started asking them, well, what do you do in those quilting groups? How come you come up with so many innovative ideas? And they said, well, talk. So what are you talking about in there? So we talk about our families, our lives, we talk about work, we just talk. And that's the power of innovation. When you have people, when you give people the freedom to do something they like, and to talk, and to get to know each other, sometimes magically, a lot of times magically, innovation comes out of it. Now you see companies like Bose, the audio equipment manufacturer. The CEO had a rule that no one is allowed to have coffee at their desk, because he wanted people to, when they're having coffee, they talk with each other and socialize, because that socialization aspect is what drives innovative thinking. Now, it's a difficult challenge, in the current times, most people work from home. There's less of that in-person interactions between people. But again, a leader needs to ask themselves, how can we create an environment where people can get together for the sake of getting together, for the sake of having a good time, and for the sake of enjoying and getting to know each other? Because it's guaranteed, once people get together, they're going to start talking about work, they're going to start talking about projects, they're going to bounce ideas off each other, and then you're going to have innovation. Now, creativity, well, goes hand in hand with innovation. But then, let's say you have a specific problem that you want to solve, and you want to get creative ideas for this problem. You want your teams to think outside the box and come up with creative ideas. You might have heard about something called an ideation session or ideation workshop. Well, that's a great way to get creative ideas out of people. But then there are a few rules with ideation workshops that people usually don't follow. Now, the number one rule of ideation workshop is no idea is wrong. No one is allowed to criticize anyone else's ideas. So people get together, put their ideas on sticky notes, put them on the wall, and that's it. No one can criticize them. Even if they come up with crazy ideas like using magic or wormholes or time travel, that's still okay. We put it on the wall. Then later, we could go about refining them. Now, the only thing that people are allowed to say or comment on each other's ideas is constructive ideas. If you think it's not going to work, you're only allowed to say how to make it work. Now, another funny story about this, and this is from Ross Akoff again, the systems thinker, and he talks about this office in New York City, back in, I think, 60s. And this office had a problem with their elevators. It was just taking too long, and people were waiting too long. And they got some consultants in to identify the problem. And consultants charged them X million dollars, did some research, and said, yeah, well, people are waiting, I don't know, up to 2 minutes in the lobby. They're only allowed to wait, according to the standards, 30 seconds. So, yep, it's boring. They're right to say we want this improved. And then they asked the consultant, well, how can we fix it? Consultant charged him again X million dollars, and then did some research and came back and said, well, you have a few options, but none of them are going to work for you. Well, you could open up new elevators, but that's going to reduce the real estate available, so you're not going to make the rental money that you're making from this office building, so it's not financially justified. You could invest in getting automated elevators, with computerized systems that identifies the optimal and efficient route of which floor they go first to pick up people and things like that. Again, it's not going to get you up to the 30-second standard, and a few other options, but none of them were viable for them. So they got no choice. They said, what should we do? Well, it's a function of the age of the building. We got to tear the building down. There is no option available. Then these guys were really desperate, so they invited their entire team, not just the leader. They even invited more junior people in the room to come up with creative ideas. They did an ideation session, and well, there was this very young guy who was very quiet, and they asked him, how come you don't have any ideas? He said, well, I have an idea, but I'm sure if I say it, you're going to say it's not going to work. So I don't want to look stupid in front of everyone. And they said, oh, we promise, we're not going to say anything about this. And then he said, well, the problem is not the length that people are waiting there. The problem is people are bored because they're waiting for 2 minutes. So if you can find a way to entertain them for the 2 minutes that they are there, they're not going to mind waiting 2 minutes for the elevator. So then they came up with some ideas of putting in some mirrors or various other things in the elevator lobby so that people don't get bored when they're waiting for elevators. The lesson is, when we want to encourage creativity, we shouldn't shut people down, and we shouldn't tell people, oh, it's not going to work. We should only comment on how to make it work.